Cole Mercer pushed the dust-covered 1970 Dodge Charger out of its battered trailer into the blinding morning light of Redline Motors Park's main paddock, and the world around him had already made up its mind before his boots even touched the asphalt. Everywhere he looked, machines gleamed under professional rigging, carbon fiber bodywork so polished it threw reflections like mirrors, team haulers the size of small apartment buildings, uniformed mechanics moving in choreographed silence, brand banners stretched 30 feet wide bearing the names of energy drinks and luxury watchmakers. Cameras from Vaughn Broadcast Network swept the paddock in slow, deliberate arcs, picking up everything that sparkled. The Charger, matte black and scratched along the rocker panel, did not sparkle. Cole straightened up, wiped his hands on a shop rag he had tucked into the waistband of his worn driving suit, and looked at the car the way a man looks at something he loves and has been afraid to love out loud for a long time. Travis Whitmore, owner of the largest racing team at the event, looked at the faded Charger and laughed. "That car can't race." Tyler Knox added, "It probably can't even survive warm-up." Cole didn't answer. He opened the hood, checked the fuel lines, and looked at the small photograph of Paige tucked inside the cabin. The next day, that car was on television. Why would a car that a billionaire said couldn't race end up on national television just one day later? The paddock at Redline Motors Park that Saturday morning was something considerably more than an ordinary race gathering. The organizing committee had structured the event as a crossover showcase. Vintage American muscle cars competing alongside modern purpose-built race machinery, all of it broadcast live on the Vaughn Broadcast Network in what the promotional materials called a celebration of American racing heritage. It was, in honest terms, a television production that happened to involve real cars, which meant that appearance mattered as much as performance, possibly more. The major teams understood this. Whitmore Racing had arrived 2 days early with 3 vehicles, a 17-person support crew in matching branded gear, and a transport setup that required 2 oversized haulers and a dedicated logistics vehicle. The Trans-American Heritage Series had sent its own 2 full squads. Even the mid-tier privateers had arranged for branded canopies, matching crew shirts, and enough equipment to suggest a serious operation. The paddock smelled of racing fuel and fresh tire rubber, and the particular metallic sharpness of machinery that is new and expensive, and has been maintained to a standard that leaves nothing unaddressed. Against all of this, Cole Mercer arrived in his 12-year-old pickup truck pulling a single-axle trailer with a rusted wheel well, and the Dodge Charger behind him looked, at first glance, like something that had come from a completely different world, which, in every meaningful sense, it had. The event's paddock staff moved Cole to a secondary staging area near the east fence, which was where non-competitive display vehicles had been assigned to park. It was a polite exile, functional, not hostile, but clearly communicating what the organizers thought the Charger's role was. Brooke Ellis, the media and logistics coordinator, delivered this determination in person, speaking carefully and apologetically, and she genuinely meant the apology. She said the car didn't fit the visual language of the broadcast, which was an accurate description of the problem and also, without intending to be, an accurate description of something larger. Cole thanked her. He folded the paper she handed him and put it in his back pocket. He went back to checking the rear suspension. Nolan, 14 years old, stood behind his father with a clipboard that held the pre-event checklist, watching, waiting, learning, as he had been learning his entire life, from the specific way his father moved around a car, which was to say methodically, without wasted motion, without impatience, as though time spent understanding something correctly was never time wasted. Travis Whitmore came around the corner of his team's hauler later that morning in the company of Tyler Knox and a representative from one of the event's larger sponsors. He was mid-conversation and in the particular good humor of a man whose day is going exactly as planned. Then the Charger came into his sight line, and he stopped. He took in the flat black paint, the few stress cracks along the hood edge, the mismatched lettering on one of the old sponsor decals that had not been fully replaced. He looked at Cole, a man in a worn driving suit with no visible affiliation, no team shirt, no branding of any kind, someone who in every visible way did not belong in this paddock on this morning. Travis Whitmore laughed, not viciously. There was no cruelty in it, exactly, but with the easy automatic confidence of a man who has spent decades being right about what things are worth. "That car can't race," he said. Tyler Knox tilted his head slightly and said, "It belongs in a museum parking lot, not on a track." A pair of young sponsored drivers who had been passing nearby heard both remarks and let themselves smile, the way people smile when someone they admire has said something that confirms what they were already thinking. Cole heard all of it. He continued, checking the fuel line. He did not respond. Nolan stood behind his father and did not respond either, but filed the moment away with the precise and unforgiving memory of a teenager witnessing injustice done to someone he loves. What Cole had not said to Travis Whitmore, because Travis Whitmore had not asked, and because Cole was not in the habit of explaining himself to people who had not demonstrated any interest in listening, was that the engine beneath the Charger's worn hood had been rebuilt from a bare block. The rotating assembly had been balanced and blueprinted to tolerances that most engine shops wouldn't attempt on a competition motor, let alone a vintage street-derived piece. The carburetor had been replaced with a period-correct but precision-engineered fuel injection system that Cole had spent 8 months developing on a flow bench he had assembled himself in the back of his garage from second-hand parts, and several textbooks that had belonged to his late wife's collection. The roll cage was certified to current road racing standards, not factory welded to the floor pan in the approximation that many vintage racers accept as sufficient, but properly tied into the chassis at 6 load paths with gusseting at every junction. The brake system used modern calipers adapted to the original spindles through a conversion that Cole had designed and had independently reviewed by a licensed chassis engineer before the first wheel turned. Every wire in the car had been reloomed, labeled, and sheathed. Every fuel line was braided stainless with swaged ends. The fire suppression system was current. The fuel cell was current. Cole had not rushed any part of it. He had worked on the car through winter evenings and summer weekends, in the time left over after a full-time job as a diagnostic technician at a dealership in Davenport. After school drop-offs, after grocery runs, after the nights when Nolan had a nightmare and needed someone sitting at the edge of the bed until the darkness in the room became ordinary again. The car had been built the way things get built, when there is no one else to pay for the shortcuts, slowly, carefully, correctly. Tyler Knox filed a formal objection with the event's technical inspection office in the early afternoon, citing the Charger's lack of current homologation documentation, the weight of its steel body structure relative to the modern composite cars in the field, the non-standard fuel delivery system, and the absence of any professional crew support. Cole had prepared for this and presented the roll cage certification signed by the certifying inspector, the fuel cell compliance sheet from the manufacturer, the brake system engineer's written sign-off, the fire system installation certificate, and the vehicle's completed technical inspection form, which the chief steward's office had already processed and stamped at 9 that morning. Knox looked at the documents the way a person looks at something they had hoped would not exist. He said, finally, with an air of delivering a verdict that superseded the paperwork, "A checklist doesn't turn scrap metal into a race car." The chief steward, who had been listening to this exchange with the patience of a man who had heard variations of it many times, said the car met all stated criteria and was cleared for competitive activity pending driver registration. He stamped Cole's copy and returned it. Knox left without comment. Cole put the documents back in their folder. He went back to the car. Naomi Pierce had been watching the afternoon unfold from a careful distance. She was a motorsport journalist working on assignment for Vaughn Broadcast, tasked with producing human interest feature segments to run between the competitive portions of the broadcast. She had good instincts and a decade of experience in environments where the real story was usually not the one that had been announced in advance. She approached Cole near the secondary display area at around 3 in the afternoon, introduced herself plainly, and asked if he had a few minutes. He said he did. She asked why he had brought the car, given how the morning had gone. Cole was quiet. Then, he said, "I didn't bring it here for them to believe in it. I brought it here because it's been waiting long enough." She asked who he had built it with. He looked at the car. The pause told her something. He said, "Most of it was me and a woman who isn't here anymore." Naomi wrote that down. She looked at the car again, really looked at it this time, not as a reporter sizing up visual potential, but as someone beginning to understand what she was actually looking at. She said she'd like to hear more, whenever he was willing. Cole said whenever she wanted. Then he went back to checking the tire pressures. Cole and Paige had met at a track day at a small regional circuit in southern Illinois, 11 years before the events at Redline Motors Park. Paige had been there as a technical volunteer for one of the run groups, and she had corrected something about Cole's corner entry technique with such direct and unhesitating certainty that he had been slightly offended, and then, in the next session, realized she was completely right. They had argued about it for an hour in the paddock after the event, and then gotten dinner and argued for another 2 hours about suspension geometry. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, Cole had understood that he was in significant trouble. Paige Sullivan, as she was then, had grown up spending summers in her uncle's fabrication shop in Carbondale, and she understood metal the way certain people understand music. As a language, as a system with internal logic, something that told you things if you knew how to listen. She could read a chassis and identify where it was tired, where it had been stressed beyond its design intent, where it would hold and where it would eventually give. She had learned this from someone who treated the knowledge as a craft, and she treated it as a craft in return. They had found the Charger together in a salvage lot outside Peoria during a weekend drive that had been nominally about visiting a parts supplier and actually about two people finding reasons to spend time in a car together. The Charger was in the back corner of the lot under a collapsed steel shelving unit, windshield gone, interior stripped and rotted, engine seized, every body panel oxidized to the particular flat grayness of metal that has been rained on for years without protection. Paige had walked around it twice, crouched down to look at the floor pan from underneath, stood up, and said, "It's worse than we thought, and it's exactly what I want." Cole had pointed out, reasonably, that it was a disaster. She had said she knew. They had bought it for $1,200 and towed it home on a flatbed borrowed from her uncle. And within 3 weeks the garage had been rearranged around it with the quiet inevitability of a priority that has declared itself. Paige named it Blackbird almost immediately, not after the aircraft, though the reference was there, but because it reminded her of something she had read once about how the ugliest birds are sometimes the ones that fly the farthest. The car was ugly. She was sure it would fly. Paige did the chassis work herself. She repaired the frame, fabricated the subframe connectors from measurements she derived herself, designed the cage geometry based on current regulations and the specific load paths she identified in the Charger's body structure, and welded the entire assembly in sections over a period of 4 months, while Nolan was an infant asleep in a baby monitor-linked cradle in the corner of the garage. Cole worked on the engine in parallel. They communicated about the project the way people communicate when they are working on something together that they both care about completely, constantly, specifically, without the need to explain context, in the shorthand of people who share a vocabulary. They drank bad coffee at 11 at night and argued about setups and laughed about mistakes and made decisions about things that wouldn't matter for years, decisions that they recorded in notebooks because they had learned, from working on machines, that the details you don't record are always the ones you need later. Page's notebooks were meticulous. Cole's were comprehensive. Together they constituted a complete record of every choice that had gone into the car, which meant that the car, in some precise and literal sense, was also a record of the two of them. When Page was diagnosed, the project was roughly 70% complete. The engine ran and the chassis was solid, but the car had not yet turned a competitive wheel. They talked about finishing it after treatment. Then the treatment stopped working, and the conversation shifted toward Nolan, toward practical arrangements, toward the future Cole was going to have to manage without her. The car stayed covered in the garage. On one of the last evenings, when Page could sit in the backyard comfortably, Cole told her they would finish it when she was better. She looked at him with the particular gentleness that people learn when they have stopped needing to protect someone from the truth. She said, "If you get to a day when you're ready, take it somewhere it can run. Just once. Let it do what we built it to do." Cole nodded. That night he had gone out to the garage, put his hand flat on the car's roof in the dark, and stood there for a long time without turning on the light. He did not tell Nolan about that moment for several years. When he did, Nolan said he already knew. He had seen his father's boots in the crack under the garage door. After Page died, Cole did not touch the Charger for almost a year. He came close a few times, stood in front of the covered shape in the dark, and then did not. He paid off the final costs of her treatment and reorganized the house finances and made sure Nolan's school situation was stable. And then for several months after all of that was managed, he mostly worked. He sold some equipment he didn't need. He kept her notebooks. He kept the Charger. His brother-in-law suggested a collector might pay well for it. Cole said he'd think about it. He did not think about it. Nolan grew up with the car as a permanent feature of the garage, covered and still, the way a significant piece of furniture becomes part of a room. He knew not to sit in it, but Cole sometimes found him standing beside it with his hands in his pockets, just looking, in the way people stand near things that contain something they're not ready to speak about directly. Cole understood this completely, because he did the same thing. The Redline Motors Park listing appeared in a trade publication that Cole read every month on Sunday mornings. He set the magazine down. He picked it up again. He read the entry a second time. He went to the garage that evening and lifted the cover and stood there for a long time, and then he got out his tools. The crisis arrived 40 minutes before the broadcast's centerpiece segment was scheduled to go live. Whitmore Racing's primary vehicle, a current generation touring car that Travis had brought specifically for the live demonstration run, developed a fuel pressure irregularity during the final warm-up cycle. The car's data system registered 4 simultaneous fault codes. Tyler Knox had his lead technician read the codes out loud, heard the interpretation, and immediately began constructing a narrative in which the problem was minor. A sensor anomaly, an instrument glitch, something that looked more alarming on the screen than it was in the real world. He was not being dishonest out of contempt for anyone's safety. He was operating out of the particular professional reflex of people who have spent careers managing how information reaches principals and cameras. The instinct to contain the story before the story contains you. His technician was less certain. He said the data was consistent with an intermittent supply drop at the high-pressure pump. Knox said it was consistent with a sensor fault. They looked at each other. Knox said to prepare the car. Warren Hale was 62 years old and had been a crew chief at the senior levels of American road racing for more than 3 decades before stepping back to occasional consulting work, and he had been present at Redline Motors Park that weekend, in a semi-official capacity that gave him access without obligation. He had no stake in Whitmore Racing's outcome. He looked at the fault code data for 90 seconds, asked one question about the wiring harness routing near the fuel module, and said the car should not run. Not in the context of this particular fault, on this particular day, with this particular operational risk calculus. He used the word probably once, meaning it as a caveat about severity, and recognized immediately that Knox had heard it as permission. Warren walked to Claire Vaughn's production position and told her what he had seen and what he thought. Claire, who had produced live motorsport programming for 11 years and had developed a functional immunity to last-minute emergencies, listened, confirmed independently with the chief technical steward, and began moving toward solutions without wasting time on the sequence of events that had produced the problem. Brooke Ellis produced a list of on-site vehicles with completed safety certification that could potentially fill the demo segment slot. The list was short. The Charger was on it. The only non-team vehicle that had passed full technical inspection that morning. Claire called Warren over. She asked one question: could the car run? Warren looked across the paddock at Cole, who was sitting on the trailer hitch with a sandwich, watching a sparrow investigate the gap under a nearby hauler. He said, if he built it, it can. Tyler Knox arrived at Claire's position at a pace that suggested urgency he was trying to disguise as purpose, and delivered a comprehensive argument against the substitution. The car was inappropriate for national broadcast. It was old. It lacked professional presentation. It would make the event look amateurish. Nobody wanted to watch vintage machinery doing demo laps when the program had been promoted on Whitmore Racing's name. Claire listened to all of it. Then she asked Knox whether his team's car was going to run. He said they were still evaluating. She said that was not a yes. She thanked him for his input and went to find Cole. Cole heard the proposal. He was quiet for a moment in the way he was always quiet when he was thinking about something that mattered. He looked at the Charger. He understood that this was a different kind of moment from the one he had imagined on all those evenings in the garage. This was not private, not personal, not the clean and simple act of taking the car somewhere it could move and letting it move. This was loud and public and complicated. He also understood that the two kinds of moments, the private one he had been preparing for and this noisy, imperfect, contingent one in front of cameras, were now the same moment, and that this was simply how it had decided to arrive. He looked at Nolan. Nolan looked back with the focused stillness of a young man who has learned not to push his father toward decisions, but who also knows when a decision has already been made. Cole told Claire he would need the night to finish his preparation and that Tyler Knox was not to have any access to the car's setup. Claire agreed to both conditions without hesitation. The night was slow and thorough and complete. Cole, Nolan, and Warren established themselves in a corner of the covered paddock garage that Brooke had arranged, spread the Charger's documentation across a folding table, and began from the front of the car and worked backward. Steering geometry, front suspension settings, brake bias, wheel bearing preload, coolant level, oil pressure, ignition timing curve. Cole ran the fuel system through its full operational range twice and found, on the second run, a pressure hesitation at peak load that felt wrong. Not dramatic, not a clear failure, but not right either. A small irregularity in the data that the car's behavior under load would eventually amplify into something real. Warren agreed it was worth investigating. Nolan had been listening carefully and had started forming his own diagnostic intuitions from years of watching and had suggestions of his own now. Tentative, offered carefully, but increasingly accurate. He suggested checking the secondary fuel line clamp near the firewall. It was the kind of detail that a scheduled inspection catches and a rushed evaluation misses. Cole found the clamp. It was loose by exactly the amount required to create microfluctuation under sustained high-demand operation. Not enough to fail immediately, enough to fail eventually, and racing is mostly the management of eventuals. He replaced the clamp. He ran the system again. The hesitation was gone. He remembered, while doing this, that Page had documented a nearly identical symptom in the Charger's original build log. In the red-covered spiral notebook he kept in the bottom drawer of his toolbox. He found the notebook. He opened it to a page near the back where her handwriting, precise and slightly angular, described a fuel pressure anomaly she had tracked down to a clamp torque issue in almost exactly the same location. She had written in the margin, "Secondary line, always check twice. It moves when the engine torques." The note was 6 years old. She had known the car the way you know something you have built from the beginning. Not just its behavior, but its tendencies, its specific ways of failing, the particular character of its weaknesses. Cole sat for a moment with the notebook open in his hands, then put it back in the drawer. Warren, who had been pretending to occupy himself at the far end of the car, found a reason to stay occupied. Tyler Knox appeared at the garage entrance near midnight. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his jacket pockets and made a speech about consequences, about what would happen if the car underperformed on live television, about the number of people watching, about the difficulty of recovering a reputation once it had been attached to a public failure. It was the speech of someone who genuinely believed that the fear of embarrassment was the most powerful motivating force available. Cole set down his torque wrench. He looked at Knox without animosity and said, "I've already been laughed at today. It didn't make the car slower." Knox left. Warren stood where he was. Nolan waited until the sound of footsteps faded and then looked at his father and said nothing, because he was 14 and already wise enough to know that some moments need nothing added to them. Before 4 in the morning, Cole warmed the engine in the paddock lane under the overhead lights. The V8 came up through its cold idle range without stumble or hesitation, settled into a deep, steady rhythm at operating temperature, and responded to throttle with the clean, immediate rise in note of an engine that has been built correctly and has finally been given room to demonstrate that fact. The sound carried through the quiet paddock, past the sleeping haulers and the parked trailers and the darkened team garages, with a particular authority that has nothing to do with volume. Warren stood to one side with his arms crossed. He nodded once. Cole brought the engine back down, let it idle for 2 full minutes while he watched the gauges, and shut it off. The silence that followed had a specific quality, the silence of something that has been still for years and has just demonstrated, without drama and without audience, that it is still completely, genuinely alive. Nolan put his hand on the hood and felt the warmth come through his palm. Cole put his arm around his son's shoulder, and they stood together in the pre-dawn dark of the paddock for a moment that neither of them would describe to anyone, because some things are not descriptions. The broadcast opened with the standard production machinery of a live event. Technical packages, sponsor features, presenter walk-ons, the deliberate and practiced escalation of a production team building toward its centerpiece. The substitution of the Charger had been processed as an administrative update and noted in the revised briefing materials, but it had not been elevated as a story point by anyone in the production hierarchy. It became one because Naomi Pierce had spent part of the previous evening editing a 2-minute feature package from the footage she had gathered. Cole in the paddock, Cole and Nolan working through the night, the engine running in the pre-dawn dark, and a still photograph of Paige beside the car that Cole had given her permission to use. Paige young and smiling, hands dark with grime, clearly happy, clearly in the right place. Naomi had sent it to Claire's segment producer at 6 in the morning with a note that said simply, "You'll want to see this before the broadcast." Claire's segment producer had watched it twice, forwarded it to Claire, and called Naomi back within 10 minutes. Travis Whitmore was in the VIP compound adjacent to the broadcast hub when the demo segment began. He was watching the monitors that Vaughn Broadcast had installed for team principals and sponsor guests. A wall of screens showing multiple camera feeds, timing data, and the broadcast output itself. He was mid-conversation with a sponsor representative when the lower third graphic appeared on the broadcast screen and read, "Cole Mercer, Independent Builder, Davenport, Iowa." He stopped talking. He watched the camera find Cole on the pre-grid, standing beside the Charger in a driving suit with no logos, helmet under his arm, talking to Nolan through the open window net. Travis Whitmore set down his coffee. The sponsor representative made a remark about the old car. Travis did not respond. He kept watching. The presenter's voice went across the broadcast. Built over 6 years by single-father Cole Mercer in a 2-car garage in Davenport, Iowa, this 1970 Dodge Charger, which its builder calls Blackbird, has never run a competitive lap. Until today. Then Naomi's footage came in, cut cleanly into the opening segment. Cole in the garage light, Nolan handing his father a wrench, the still photograph of Paige. Younger, smiling, alive, her hands dirty with the work of a project she would not live to see completed. Travis Whitmore stood at his monitors and watched all of it. Cole pulled his helmet on at the grid with the focused, practical attention of a man who has been preparing for something a long time. The Charger's V8, all of it rebuilt, all of it balanced, all of it understood from the inside out, settled into its pre-race idle with the particular authority of a prepared engine in a quiet moment. The broadcast audio caught the note clearly. In the VIP area, in the grandstands, in the homes of however many thousands of people who were watching, that sound arrived with the specific identity of something genuine. Not managed, not produced, not manufactured to specifications. Cole moved through his checks and then sat still for a moment with his hands on the wheel, and whatever he was thinking in that moment, he kept to himself. Then the lights came on and the session began. Cole drove with the cleanliness of someone who has studied every corner of a track before arriving at it, which he had driven the red line circuit on the simulator twice the week before, had read the notes of 2 drivers who had competed there in similar cars, and had walked the circuit on foot the previous morning while the sponsored teams were running their initial sessions. He carried entry speed through the first technical complex with a late apex line that put the car exactly where maximum mechanical traction was available at corner exit. He was smooth where smoothness was fast and decisive where decisiveness was required, and the 2 modes transitioned into each other with the invisible fluency of preparation that has been thorough enough to become instinct. On the 4th lap, one of the modern cars in the group developed an oversteer condition at the exit of the long sweeper, drifted wide, and left a gap on the inside that Cole evaluated in a fraction of a second and drove through cleanly. No contact, correct speed, controlled exit, the Charger's broad rear end, settling under traction as the straight opened ahead. The camera at the corner exit captured the entire sequence. The struggling car, the gap, the matte black Charger threading through on a precise line, the exhaust note sharpening on the following straight as Cole extended the throttle and the engine answered. It was, in duration, perhaps 4 seconds of footage. It was, in terms of what it showed, a complete statement. Cole heard the broadcast commentary through the delayed feed that Nolan was monitoring from the pit wall on a second-hand radio. He heard the presenter say Paige's name during the 3rd lap, heard it embedded in a sentence about the car's history and the 6-year build, and felt something shift in his chest that was not grief and was not its absence. Something more like the specific feeling of hearing a truth spoken in the right register at the right time. He breathed carefully. He thought of something Paige had said when the car was nearly finished, when it had started to look like the thing they had imagined rather than the thing they had found. She had said, somewhat to herself, looking at the car from the garage doorway, "Let it run like it remembers me." He had not fully understood it then. He understood it now, with the car moving under him and the engine carrying all of her decisions, the suspension geometry she had chosen, the chassis stiffness she had calibrated, the weight distribution she had worked out on paper and verified through feel, expressing themselves as balance and response, and the specific sensation of a car that is right. He brought the Charger through the final corner, down the short straight, across the line, and the sound from the spectator area was longer and louder than he had expected. And he sat in the car for a moment after crossing the finish and let that sound be what it was. The clip moved quickly. By the time Cole had parked and climbed out and removed his helmet, the pass in the sweeper, 4 seconds, matte black Charger, gap, clean exit, had already been clipped and posted by the Vaughn broadcast social team. But the segment that moved faster and further and to more people was the 30 seconds from the opening package. Cole in the dark garage, Nolan handing the wrench, Paige in the photograph, the note that said built over 6 years. That sequence had the quality that professional producers spend entire careers attempting to manufacture and that genuine stories occasionally produce without effort. The quality of being recognizably true in a way the camera can feel and audiences have learned to identify. Someone had also found the paddock footage from the previous morning. Someone had clipped it clean. Travis Whitmore saying, "That car can't race," then cut directly to the Charger crossing the finish line. That version found its audience with the speed and efficiency of something that confirms what a large number of people had already decided they felt. Travis Whitmore was approached outside the VIP compound by a broadcast journalist within an hour of the session's end. The journalist had the clip on his phone and asked Travis directly about the statement. Travis stood there for a moment. He was not, at his core, a man who believed in self-deception, and he had watched the run, and he had watched the footage of Cole and Nolan working through the night, and he had seen the photograph of Paige, and something in all of that had moved through whatever insulation wealth and certainty provide, and reached him. He took a breath. He said he had misjudged the car. He said he had made an assumption based on appearance and had been wrong about it. He said it looking at the camera, without hedging, without redirection. It was not comfortable for him. It was, because of the visible discomfort, entirely credible. Tyler Knox did not handle his moment with the same straightforwardness. Naomi had obtained the Whitmore Racing technical session log from the chief steward's office. The record that showed the fuel system fault code had been flagged internally during the previous day's practice session, logged and not acted upon. She asked Knox about the sequence of events. He described it as a judgment call within acceptable operational parameters. Warren Hale was standing nearby and had not been asked for a comment but offered one regardless, in the measured and unhurried tone of a man who has nothing left to protect. He said a fuel delivery irregularity at high engine speed was not a judgment call. He said it was a documented risk. He said the decision to delay action had been made for reasons that had nothing to do with the safety of the car or the driver. He said all of this calmly and specifically, and in the presence of Naomi's camera. That statement became the second most shared item from the broadcast day. Tyler Knox was removed from his position as Whitmore Racing's technical director 3 days later. The team's official communication cited a review of race day decision-making processes. Cole was with Nolan beside the Charger when Travis Whitmore walked over. The crowd around the car had grown. Event staff, other competitors, spectators who had come down from the stands when the session ended. Travis moved through them with the directness of a man who has made a decision and is executing it before doubt can organize. He looked at Cole. Cole looked back. Travis said, "I was wrong." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The car heard you." Travis looked at the Charger, really looked at it, in the way he had not looked at it the previous morning. He said the run had been impressive. Cole thanked him without warmth and without coldness, evenly, the way you receive something offered honestly. Travis nodded. He left. The small crowd around them had been close enough to hear the exchange. Nobody said anything. The silence afterward had a texture to it, a collective recognition of something that had resolved the way it was supposed to resolve, without theater, without a winner's speech, without any of the performances that public confrontations usually require. Warren Hale began appearing at Cole's garage in Davenport on occasional Saturdays after the event, driving 3 hours from his house in Indianapolis with a thermos of coffee and his own toolbox in the truck bed. He worked on what he called the Charger's unfinished details, the suspension corner weights, the gearbox shift quality, the brake pedal feel under progressive application. He never asked for payment. Cole never offered any. They worked in the comfortable near silence of two people who understand the same language and don't need to narrate it. Nolan worked alongside them both, asking questions when he had them and listening to the answers, building toward something that was taking shape in him the way things take shape when they are grown rather than installed. Several sponsors reached out to Cole in the week following the broadcast. Offers arrived for logo placement, parts supply contracts, commercial usage rights. One brand representative wanted the Chargers' image for a campaign. Another offered a fee for the broadcast footage. Cole thanked each of them and declined each of them. Travis Whitmore called personally a few days after the event. He made an offer for the Blackbird, a figure that Cole's accountant confirmed was significant, the kind of number that doesn't come along without consideration. Cole told Travis he appreciated the call. Travis asked why the answer was no. Cole said, "It's not a collectible, it's a promise I made to someone." There was a pause on the line. Travis said he understood. Cole thought, with some surprise, that Travis might actually mean it. Claire Vaughn called 10 days after the event. She was developing a documentary series, 6 episodes, focused on independent builders, small garages, vintage race vehicles, and the specific kind of knowledge that the people who work alone in the dark with their hands carry and have always carried. She said she had spoken to 3 other subjects and that Cole and the Charger were the beginning she had been looking for. She said she wanted to tell the story honestly, without the narrative shortcuts that television habitually uses to make real things more convenient, without turning Cole into a symbol of something, without reducing the car to a metaphor, without rushing toward the emotional moments or constructing conflict where none existed. Cole asked what that commitment meant in practical terms. She said it meant real time in the garage, real work shown in real duration, no imposed story structure, no coaching of subject responses. She said if a segment was boring, it would stay in, because actual work was frequently boring, and that was part of what made it honest. Cole said that was the only version he would consider. He said one condition: the series would show the craft as craft. The welders, fabricators, and machinists would be shown as people who know something, not as background characters, not as color, not as supporting roles in a larger narrative that belonged to someone else. Claire said she would write that into the development agreement. Cole said he would have a lawyer review it. Claire said that was exactly the right answer. Nolan asked his father that evening whether they were going to be on television again. Cole said probably. Nolan said I thought it might be weird. Cole agreed some parts would probably be weird. Nolan considered this and said he thought it would be okay anyway. Cole said he thought so too. Nolan was quiet for a moment and then said, "Mom would have had opinions about how they lit the garage." Cole laughed, a real laugh, open and unguarded. He said Paige would have had strong opinions about everything related to the production and would have been right about most of them and vocal about all of them. They sat together in the garage for a while after that, in the particular comfort of two people who have found a way to talk about someone they love without the weight of it closing everything down. The charger was back on its stands. Warren's most recent notes were on the workbench. The evening light came in through the high windows in long, flat bars and fell across the car's roof, and the black paint absorbed it in the way old things absorb light, quietly, without reflection, taking it in rather than sending it back. Late on the evening after the event, before the drive back to Davenport, Cole had loaded the charger back onto the trailer alone, guiding it slowly up the ramps while Nolan walked ahead, signaling, the two of them working in the practiced quiet of a shared routine. When the car was secured and the cover was down, Cole stood at the rear of the trailer in the late afternoon light. Claire had come over to say something about the broadcast, about the response, about what the next steps might look like. He had been only partly listening. She paused and tried again and said, "You know, the whole country just watched that car race." Cole looked at the trailer, at the shape under the cover, at the outline of the roofline and the rear spoiler pressing gently against the fabric. He said quietly, "No, the whole country just watched it be remembered." Claire didn't have an answer for that. She nodded and left him to it. Cole put his hand flat against the side of the trailer, palm open, the metal warm from the afternoon. Somewhere beneath the cover, in the dark, the engine was cooling through its cycles, ticking as the heat moved outward and the metal contracted back toward stillness. It had run one lap for Paige. It had run one lap for Cole. And it had run one lap, perhaps, for every project left covered in a garage somewhere. Every half-finished thing and paused dream and quiet promise made to someone who is no longer there to see it completed, but who is present in every decision that went into the building of it, present in the balance of the chassis and the note of the engine and the way it holds a line through a corner. The Blackbird had been dismissed. It had been ugly and covered in dust and declared incapable by a man with every advantage and no particular reason to look closer. It had run anyway. It had done the thing Paige always said it would do. It had flown.
We're like the second boss. You gotta fucking run. Oh wow, that was nice. Oh, I'm gonna roll. Oh wow! He cheated. Oh. No way, bro! I could have used the red tides! I fucked up. What's up, D? How you doing? I don't know how much I would have done. Should I go in, D? Welcome in, guys. 45, 11, 45. Damn. Tough. Nice. Oh, you know what? Let me set the other spark. Have I been live long? No, I haven't been live very long, bro. To be honest with you. Been live for an hour and 14 minutes, my brother. Travel.